The stars had no memory. They burned the same way they had burned for billions of years, not caring about the small lives that lived and died beneath them. But the people who traveled between those stars remembered everything. They remembered which species had risen and which had fallen. They remembered the wars and the treaties and the betrayals. And they remembered humanity. Ambassador Kethral stood alone in the memorial hall of the Galactic Concord, watching holographic images float in the darkness around him. His four eyes moved slowly across the scenes playing out before him. Cities burning, ships exploding in the black of space, people running through streets filled with smoke and fire, children crying for parents who would never come. Earth, the blue world, the home of a species called humans. 300 years ago, the Vethrani Dominion had decided that humanity was a threat. Not because humans had attacked them. Not because humans had weapons that could hurt them. The Vethrani had looked at human history and seen a species that never stopped fighting, never stopped growing, never stopped reaching for things beyond their grasp. They had seen a species that might one day become powerful enough to challenge them, so they had destroyed them. Kethral watched the footage of the final days. Human ships rising from the surface of Earth, trying desperately to escape. Most of them were slow and clumsy, built for travel within their own solar system. They had not yet learned how to fold space, how to jump between stars in the blink of an eye. They were children trying to outrun giants. The Vethrani had hunted them down one by one. Colony ships packed with thousands of people, blown apart in seconds. Small vessels carrying families, vaporized before they could send a single distress signal. The Vethrani were thorough. They were patient. They had done this before. In the hologram, Earth itself was dying. Nuclear fire spread across continents as humans used their own weapons against the Vethrani landing forces. They knew they could not win. They fought anyway. Cities became graves. Oceans boiled where orbital strikes hit the water. The planet that had given birth to humanity became a tomb. The last image showed a single human ship disappearing into the darkness between stars, running with everything it had. Then static. Then nothing. Kethral turned off the display. He had watched this footage many times over the past 50 years. He had studied humanity more than any other scholar in the Concord. Their music, which could make him feel emotions he did not have names for. Their art, which showed both terrible darkness and impossible hope. Their stories, which always seemed to end with someone refusing to give up even when giving up was the only logical choice. He had never met a human. No one had, not in 300 years. The Vethrani had made sure of that. The door behind him opened, and light spilled into the dark room. Kethral did not turn around. He knew who it was by the sound of the footsteps. "Ambassador," said a voice like grinding metal. "The memorial ceremony is about to begin. The other delegates are waiting." Kethral finally turned. The Vethrani delegate stood in the doorway, tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like stone and eyes that held no warmth. Her name was High Commander Thesek, and she had personally overseen the destruction of the last known human colony ship 2 centuries ago. "I was paying my respects," Kethral said. Thesek made a sound that might have been laughter. "To animals?" "They were barely more than primitives, Ambassador. They had not even left their own solar system when we found them. They had split the atom. They had walked on their moon. They had sent machines to other planets to learn and explore." Kethral moved past her toward the hallway. They were reaching for the stars. Given time, they might have reached them. Which is exactly why we stopped them. Thesek fell into step beside him. "The Dominion does not wait for threats to grow. We remove them while they are small. It is simple wisdom." Kethral said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with Vethrani was pointless. They saw the universe as a competition, and competitors were to be eliminated before they could compete. The memorial ceremony was held in the Grand Chamber, where representatives from 40 different species had gathered. They sat in curved rows around a central platform, their bodies of all shapes and sizes, their eyes of every color. The Galactic Concord was supposed to represent peace and cooperation between the stars. But Kethril knew the truth. It represented power. The powerful made the rules, and the weak followed them or died. The Vethrani had joined the Concord shortly after destroying humanity. There had been protests at first. Some species had called for sanctions, for punishment, for justice. But the Vethrani were strong, and the Concord needed strong members. Politics demanded pragmatism. Morality was expensive, and no one wanted to pay the price on, so humanity had been forgotten. Their world was declared a protected memorial site, which meant no one was allowed to visit it. Their few artifacts were placed in museums. Their languages were studied by scholars. And once a year, the Concord held a ceremony to remember them, as if that made everything right. Kethril took his seat and watched as the Vethrani High Speaker rose to address the assembly. She spoke of regret and necessity. She spoke of the difficult choices that powerful civilizations must make. She spoke of humanity's potential and the tragedy of their loss. She did not speak of the children who had burned. She did not speak of the ships filled with families that her people had destroyed. She did not speak of the 200 years her forces had spent hunting down every last human vessel, making sure that not a single one escaped. It is almost a pity, the High Speaker concluded. They fought bravely for primitives. Perhaps in another universe, they might have joined us as equals. The ceremony ended. Delegates rose and mingled, talking of trade agreements and border disputes and the thousand small matters that made up galactic politics. Humanity was already forgotten again, reduced to a footnote in history. Kethril did not join the conversations. He stood by a window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth still turned, dead and poisoned, its cities crumbling to dust. Somewhere out there, the wreckage of human ships still floated in the void. Frozen monuments to a species that had reached for the stars and been struck down for daring to dream. He thought about the last image he had seen in the memorial hall, that single ship, disappearing into the darkness. The record said it had been destroyed 200 years ago, along with all the others. The Vethrani were thorough. Everyone knew that. But Kethril had noticed something strange in his research. The destruction of that final ship had never been confirmed visually. The Vethrani had tracked it to the edge of known space, to a region so empty and dark that no one had ever bothered to explore it. They had fired their weapons into the void. They had declared the mission complete, but they had never found wreckage. They had never recovered bodies. They had simply assumed that nothing could survive in that darkness, that no one could run far enough or hide well enough to escape them. Kethril looked at the stars and wondered. The Vethrani were powerful. The Vethrani were patient. The Vethrani were thorough, but humans were stubborn. Every record he had studied, every story he had read, every song he had heard told the same message. Humans did not give up. Humans did not accept defeat. Humans found a way, even when there was no way to find. He shook his head. It was a foolish thought. Humanity was dead. Everyone knew that. The universe had moved on without them, and it always would. Ambassador Kethril returned to his duties, and the memorial ceremony faded into memory, just like the species it was meant to honor. The stars continued to burn. The galaxy continued to turn. And in the dark spaces between those stars, in the empty places where no one ever looked, something that should not exist continued to survive, and to grow, and to remember. 60 years passed like water through fingers. The galaxy changed in small ways and stayed the same in large ones. New trade routes opened. Old conflicts ended. Species rose and fell in the endless dance of civilization. And the Vethrani Dominion remained powerful, feared, an untouchable god. Then the disappearances began. The first report came from a mining outpost on the edge of Vethrani space. Station Theta 7, they called it. A small facility that pulled rare metals from asteroids. 50 workers, all Vethrani, all loyal servants of the Dominion. One day, they were filing routine reports. The next day, silence. Commander Desek received the news in her office aboard the Dominion flagship. She had risen far in 60 years, from delegate to military commander to head of Vethrani intelligence. Her gray skin had grown darker with age, and her eyes had grown colder. She had seen much in her long life. She had done more. Send an investigation team, she ordered. Pirates, probably. The outer territories are full of scavengers. The investigation team found the station intact. The lights were on. The air was clean. The food in the dining hall was still warm. But the 50 workers were gone. No bodies, no blood. No signs of struggle. It was as if they had simply stopped existing. And on the command console, someone had carved words into the metal. The letters were crude, made with a simple tool. The language was unknown to the translation systems. Desek dismissed the report. Strange things happened in the outer territories. Space was vast and full of mysteries. One missing station meant nothing. Then it happened again. A patrol ship vanished near the border. A colony reported strange lights in the sky before going silent. A supply convoy disappeared in a region that had been traveled safely for centuries. Each time, the same pattern. No wreckage. No survivors. And somewhere nearby, those same strange words carved into rock or metal or ice dot the reports piled up on Desek's desk. She told herself it was coincidence. She told herself it was pirates or accidents or equipment failures. She told herself many things to avoid thinking about what the evidence was telling her. Then one of her analysts cracked the language. His name was Varric, a young scholar with too much curiosity and not enough fear. He had spent months studying the carved words, comparing them to every language in the Concord's databases. He had found nothing. So he had started looking at dead languages. Languages that no one spoke anymore. Languages that belonged to species that no longer existed. He found a match. Varric stood in Desek's office, holding a datapad with shaking hands. He was afraid to speak, but he was more afraid to stay silent. The language is English, he said. It was one of the primary languages of humanity. Desek stared at him. For a long moment, she did not move. Then she spoke, and her voice was ice. That is impossible. Humanity is extinct. I personally oversaw the destruction of their last vessel. I know, Commander. I checked the records. But the language is unmistakable. The words translate to a simple phrase. Varric looked at his datapad, then back at Desek. They say, we remember. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush worlds. Desek moved fast. She classified the report at the highest level. She transferred Varric to a remote outpost where he could tell no one what he had learned. She deleted the evidence, rewrote the investigation files, and told her superiors that the disappearances were the work of an unknown pirate faction. But she could not delete her own memories. She could not stop thinking about that day, 200 years ago, when she had chased the last human ship to the edge of known space. The ship had been damaged, leaking air, running on failing engines. It should have been easy prey, but the humans had done something unexpected. They had turned toward the Great Void, a region of space so empty that even light seemed to die there. No stars, no planets. No resources. Nothing but darkness stretching for hundreds of light years in every direction. Desek had fired her. weapons into that darkness. She had told herself the humans were dead. She had received a commendation for completing the extermination. She had built her entire career on that moment. Now, in the quiet of her office, she wondered if she had made a mistake. The disappearances continued. More stations went silent. More ships vanished. The carved words appeared in new locations, always the same message. We remember. We remember. We remember. Desik began her own secret investigation. She tracked the pattern of disappearances, looking for meaning in the chaos. What she found made her blood run cold. The disappearances were not random. They formed a spiral, slowly tightening, moving inward from the outer edges of Vethrani space toward the heart of the Dominion. Someone was testing their defenses. Someone was learning their patterns. Someone was preparing for something bigger. And the spiral had started at the edge of the Great Void. Desik made a decision. She would go there herself. She would take her fastest ship and her best soldiers and find out what was hiding in that darkness. She would finish what she had started 200 years ago. She told no one her true destination. She filed a report saying she was conducting a routine inspection of the outer territories. She loaded her ship with weapons and supplies and set course for the edge of known space. The journey took 3 weeks. As she traveled, more reports came in. A military base had been attacked and destroyed. Not captured, not occupied, but completely destroyed, reduced to atoms. The only thing left behind was a message broadcast on all frequencies. We remember what you did. Desik pushed her ship faster. She reached the border of the Great Void on a day that felt like any other. The stars thinned out until there was only one left, a dim red dwarf that barely deserved the name. Beyond it, darkness. Endless, absolute darkness. Desik ordered her sensors to maximum range. She searched for any sign of life, any hint of technology, any evidence that something survived in that emptiness. At first, she found nothing. The void was as dead as it had always been. She began to think she had been wrong, that the humans really were extinct, that the disappearances were just coincidence after all. Then her sensors picked up a signal. It was faint, barely a whisper against the background noise of the universe. But it was there, and it was getting stronger. Desik tried to trace the signal to its source. Her computers worked for hours, trying to penetrate the darkness. What they found should have been impossible. The signal was not coming from one location. It was coming from everywhere. The entire void was full of signals, thousands of them, millions of them, all coordinating, all moving, all converging on a single point in space. That point was directly behind her ship. Desik spun around. Her view screen showed nothing but empty space. But her sensors were screaming warnings. Something was there. Something huge. Something that had been watching her since she arrived. A voice crackled through her communication system. It was speaking perfect Vethrani, but the accent was strange, old-fashioned, learned from recordings rather than living speakers. "Commander Desik," the voice said, "we have been waiting for you. We have been waiting for all of you. For 300 years we have been preparing, building, growing, remembering." Desik tried to respond. She tried to send a distress signal. She tried to activate her weapons. Nothing worked. Her ship was dead in space, all systems frozen by technology she could not understand. "You thought you destroyed us," the voice continued. "You thought you were thorough. You thought you had won. But you made a mistake, Commander. You assumed that because you could not see us, we no longer existed. You stopped looking. You stopped worrying. You forgot about us." The darkness in front of Desik's ship began to change. Lights appeared, dim at first, then brighter. Thousands of lights. Millions of lights. Ships emerging from hiding places that should not exist, using technology that should not work, crewed by people who should not be alive. "We never forgot about you," the voice said. "We never stopped preparing. And now, Commander, we are ready." The last thing Desek saw before her ship was swallowed by the light was a flag flying from the lead vessel. It showed a blue circle on a black background, with stars scattered across it like seeds. The flag of Earth, the flag of humanity. The flag of the species she had failed to destroy. 3 days later, the Dominion received a report that Commander Desek's ship had vanished during a routine inspection of the outer territories. No wreckage was found. No survivors were recovered. Only a message carved into an asteroid at the edge of known space. "We remember, and we are coming." The footage arrived at the Galactic Concord headquarters on a morning that had started like any other. Delegates were arguing about trade tariffs. Ambassadors were discussing border agreements. The universe was conducting its business as usual. Then the screens lit up with images from Desek Prime, and everything changed. Ambassador Kethrol was in his office when the emergency broadcast began. He dropped the document he was reading and moved closer to his view screen, his four eyes widening as he watched the impossible unfold. Desek Prime was a fortress world. The Vethrani had spent centuries turning it into a military stronghold, a symbol of their power. 3 million soldiers lived there. The orbital defense grid was 10 layers deep, filled with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Nothing could threaten Desek Prime. Everyone knew that. The footage showed the sky splitting open. There was no other way to describe it. Space itself seemed to tear apart, creating wounds in reality that bled light in colors Kethrol had never seen. The tears opened across the entire sky. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, appearing without warning. Ships emerged from the wounds. They were unlike anything in the Concord's databases. Their hulls were dark and angular, built for war rather than beauty. They moved together in perfect formation, as if controlled by a single mind. And there were so many of them. Thousands of ships, pouring out of the tears like water from a broken dam. The Vethrani defense grid opened fire. Energy beams and missiles and weapons of every kind reached up toward the invading fleet. The sky burned with the light of 1,000 explosions. It made no difference. The invading ships moved through the fire like ghosts. Some of them took hits, but they kept coming. Their own weapons struck back with terrible precision, targeting the defense platforms one by one. Within an hour, the orbital grid was falling apart. Within 2 hours, it was gone. Ground forces reported chaos. Soldiers in sealed armor were appearing inside bunkers and command centers, bypassing walls and shields as if they did not exist. The soldiers moved faster than any known species. They fought without fear and without mercy. But they did something strange. They only targeted military personnel. Civilian areas were left untouched. Factories and hospitals and homes were ignored. The invaders were not interested in destruction. They were interested in something else. The battle for Desek Prime lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Vethrani military presence on the planet had been destroyed. Completely destroyed. Not captured, not occupied, but wiped from existence. 3 million soldiers, gone. The mightiest fortress in the Dominion, fallen. But the 3 million civilians who lived alongside those soldiers were alive. Confused and terrified, but alive. The invading fleet gathered above the planet. They did not leave. They did not attack the civilians. They simply waited, as if they were expecting something. Then every screen on the planet lit up with a face that no one had seen in 300 years. A human face. She was old. This woman. Her hair was white, and her skin was lined with wrinkles that spoke of a long and difficult life. But her eyes were sharp and clear, burning with an intensity that made Kethrol's breath catch in his throat. "People of the galaxy," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "My name is Admiral Chun, and I speak for the Remnant. We are the descendants of the colony ship Perseverance, which escaped the destruction of Earth 300 years ago. Catherall felt his heart stop. The Perseverance. The last ship. The one that had vanished into the void. The Vethrani Dominion tried to destroy us, Admiral Chung continued. They hunted us across the stars. They killed our families. They burned our homeworld. They thought they had succeeded. They were wrong. The camera pulled back, showing the fleet behind her. Ships stretched to the horizon, more ships than Catherall could count. We spent 300 years in the darkness between stars. We had nothing but our ship, our knowledge, and our determination to survive. We built new ships. We developed new technology. We raised new generations who knew nothing of Earth except the stories their parents told them. And we waited. Admiral Chun leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to look directly at Catherall through the screen. We waited for the right moment. The moment when we were strong enough to return. The moment when we could look the Vethrani in the eye and show them that we are not so easy to kill. The transmission paused. When Admiral Chun spoke again, her voice was harder. But we are not here for revenge. We are not here to do what the Vethrani did to us. We are here for justice. The Vethrani took everything from our ancestors. We will take the same from them. Their military power. Their ability to threaten others. Their belief that they can destroy entire species and face no consequences. She stood up, and the flag of Earth hung behind her. We will not harm civilians. We will not attack other species. Our war is with the Vethrani military, and only the Vethrani military. When that war is over, we will take our place among the stars as equals. But first, we will teach the Minion a lesson they should have learned long ago. Admiral Chun's eyes burned with cold fire. You cannot destroy a species that refuses to die. You cannot break a people who refuse to be broken. And you cannot escape justice forever, no matter how powerful you think you are. The transmission ended. The Galactic Concord erupted into chaos. Catherall watched the emergency session from his seat in the assembly hall. Delegates screamed at each other. Some demanded immediate action against the remnant. Others called for the Concord to stay out of the conflict. The Vethrani representative was on his feet, his voice shaking with fury, demanding that the Concord honor its mutual defense treaties. These animals attacked sovereign Vethrani territory, he shouted. They destroyed 3 million of our soldiers. The Concord must respond. We must crush them before they grow stronger. A delegate from the Kishari Union stood up. Her voice was quiet but carried through the hall. Why should we fight your war? You created this enemy. You murdered their entire species. Now they have returned, and you want us to clean up your mess? They are a threat to everyone, the Vethrani insisted. If we do not stop them now, they will not stop with us. They will come for all of you eventually, will they? Catherall found himself speaking before he realized it. The Admiral said they would not attack other species. The footage from Desek Prime shows they kept their word. Civilians were unharmed. Only military targets were destroyed. The Vethrani turned to face him, his eyes filled with hatred. You defend them? These primitives who should have died 300 years ago. I defend the truth, Catherall replied. I have studied humanity for a century. I know what they were. I know what they valued. They were not monsters. They were explorers, artists, dreamers. The only reason they became warriors is because you gave them no choice. The hall fell silent. The remnant has not asked for our help, Catherall continued. They have not threatened us. They have made their intentions clear. They want justice against the Vethrani and nothing more. Perhaps we should wait and see if they keep their word before we decide to make enemies of them. The debate lasted for hours. In the end, the Concord voted to remain neutral. They would not help the Vethrani, but they would not help the remnant either. They would watch and wait and see what happened. The Vethrani delegates stormed out of the assembly, promising that the Dominion would remember this betrayal. The other delegates returned to their ships, carrying news of humanity's return to every corner of the galaxy. Kethril stayed behind in the empty hall, looking up at the stars through the transparent ceiling. Somewhere out there, the Remnant was continuing their campaign. Somewhere out there, the descendants of a species that should have died were proving that survival was possible even in the darkest circumstances. He thought about Admiral Chum's words. "We are not here for revenge. We are here for justice." He hoped she was telling the truth. He hoped humanity had kept their souls during their long years in the darkness. He hoped they were still the dreamers and explorers he had read about in their ancient stories. But even if they were not, even if the darkness had changed them into something else, Kethril could not blame them. The Vethrani had tried to murder every human in existence. If the survivors had become hard and cold and merciless, the Vethrani had only themselves to blame. The galaxy had changed forever in a single day. Humanity was back, and nothing would ever be the same again. The war lasted 3 years. 3 years of fire and death and impossible victories. 3 years of watching the Vethrani Dominion, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, crumble like sand before the tide. 3 years of humanity proving that they had learned lessons in the darkness that no other species could understand. Ambassador Kethril, every report, every battle, every development with an obsession that worried his colleagues. He could not help himself. He had spent a century studying a dead species, mourning what had been lost. Now that species was alive again, and he needed to understand what they had become. The Remnant fought differently than anyone expected. Their ships did not move like normal ships. They appeared and disappeared at will, jumping through space using technology that the Concord scientists could not explain. Their weapons were precise beyond belief, striking targets with perfect accuracy while leaving everything else untouched. Their soldiers moved like ghosts, appearing inside enemy fortifications without warning. But the strangest thing was, what they did not do. They did not bomb cities. They did not attack civilian ships. They did not destroy infrastructure or poison water supplies, or do any of the 1,000 cruel things that armies usually did in war. When they captured a Vethrani world, they removed the military presence and then simply left. The civilians were given supplies and medical care if they needed it. The planetary governments were allowed to continue functioning. The Remnant was not fighting a war of conquest. They were fighting a war of dismantlement. They wanted to destroy the Vethrani military, and nothing else. Kethril traveled to one of the captured worlds to see for himself. He walked through streets that had been filled with soldiers a month before. Now those streets were quiet. The military bases empty shells, the weapons platforms silent. The Vethrani civilians watched him with suspicious eyes, but they were alive. They were safe. They had not been punished for the crimes of their government. He found a local official, a middle-aged Vethrani named Korath, who had overseen the planetary administration before the invasion. "What happened here?" Kethril asked. "What did they do?" Korath's eyes were haunted. "They came in the night. Their ships appeared from nowhere, surrounding the planet before anyone could react. We thought we were going to die. We thought they would burn our world the way we burned theirs." He paused, struggling with the memory. "Instead, they sent a message. They told us to evacuate all military personnel and equipment to designated areas. They gave us 12 hours. Anyone who surrendered would be taken prisoner and treated according to galactic law. Anyone who resisted would be destroyed. And the civilians? They told us to stay in our homes. They promised that no one who was not wearing a uniform would be harmed." Korath shook his head slowly. "We did not believe them. How could we? After what we did to their people? But we had no choice. Our fleet was already burning. Our defense grid was gone. We did what they asked, and they kept their word? Every word. Korath looked up at the sky, where remnant ships had hung like dark angels during the occupation. They took our soldiers. They destroyed our weapons. They dismantled our factories. But they did not touch our homes. They did not hurt our children. They gave us food when our supplies ran low. His voice dropped to a whisper. One of their soldiers found a Vethrani child crying in the ruins of a military base. The child's father had been a commander who died in the fighting. The soldier picked up the child, carried her to safety, and made sure she was returned to her family. Cathro felt something shift in his chest. Why would they do that? I asked the same question, Korath said. When their admiral came to accept our surrender, I asked her why they showed us mercy when we had shown them none. Do you know what she told me? Cathro waited. She said that revenge would have been easy. Revenge would have felt good. But revenge would have made them into the same monsters that destroyed their world. She said that they did not survive 300 years in the darkness just to become the thing they hated. The administrator's voice cracked. She said that the best revenge was to be better, to prove that humanity deserved to survive, to show the galaxy what the Vethrani tried to destroy. Cathral returned to the Concord with a new understanding of the Remnant. They were not the broken survivors he had expected. They were not the rage-filled Avengers that the Vethrani had feared. They were something else entirely. Something that 300 years of isolation had, forged into steel. But not everyone in the galaxy was ready to accept them. The Concord remained officially neutral, but tensions were rising. Some species feared that the Remnant would not stop with the Vethrani. Others worried that human technology was too advanced, that humanity would become the next dominant power and would not be kind to those who had done nothing while their ancestors burned. Faction within the Concord began pushing for intervention. They argued that the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting too quickly, that humanity needed to be contained before they became unstoppable. They are growing too strong, the Vethrani representative argued in a closed session. Every day they capture more of our worlds, learn more of our secrets, add more ships to their fleet. If we do not act now, we may never be able to act at all. What would you have us do? Cathral demanded. Attack them? Join your war? You started this conflict. You created this enemy. And now you want us to die for your mistakes? This is not about the past. This is about the future. Do you want humanity to rule the galaxy? Do you want to spend the rest of your existence bowing to a species that remembers every wrong that was done to them? The chamber fell silent. It was a good question. A frightening question. The Remnant had shown mercy so far, but would that mercy last? Would they forgive the species that had watched Earth burn and done nothing? Would they forgive the Concord for welcoming the Vethrani into their ranks? Cathral thought about Admiral Chun, about her calm voice and burning eyes. He thought about the soldier who had saved the Vethrani child. He thought about the stories he had read, the songs he had heard, the art he had studied. Yes, he said finally, I would rather live in a galaxy led by humanity than die in a war to prevent it. They have shown us who they are. They have kept every promise they made. And they have done something that we have never seen before. They have won a war without becoming monsters. He stood up, facing the assembled delegates. The Remnant could have destroyed the Vethrani. They could have burned their worlds and killed their children and erased them from existence the way their ancestors were erased. Instead, they chose justice over revenge. They chose mercy over cruelty. They chose to be better than their enemies. His voice hardened. That is not weakness. That is strength. The kind of strength that cannot be measured in ships or weapons. The kind of strength that empires are built on. And if humanity wants to lead the galaxy with that kind of strength, I will follow them gladly. The vote was close, but the Concorde maintained its neutrality. The war continued. 6 months later, the remnant fleet surrounded Vethros, the Vethrani homeworld. The final battle was about to begin, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if humanity would keep its promises when victory was finally within reach, or if the darkness they had survived had finally consumed them after all. The sky above Vethros burned with the light of 1,000 ships. Every remaining warship in the Vethrani Dominion had been called home. 3 years of defeats had reduced their once mighty fleet to a fraction of its former size. But what remained was still formidable. They formed a wall of metal and fire around their homeworld, determined to make their last stand count. The orbital defense grid was the most powerful ever constructed. 10 layers of weapons platforms surrounded the planet, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. Underground bunkers held the civilian population, 2 billion Vethrani huddled in darkness, waiting for the end. They had prepared for 3 years. They had built and trained and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. None of it would be enough. Everyone knew that. But the Vethrani would not surrender. They would not bow to the species they had tried to exterminate. They would fight until the last ship was destroyed. The last soldier was dead. The last breath was taken. Admiral Chun watched the Vethrani formation from the bridge of her flagship. The Perseverance, too. The name was a reminder of where they had come from, of the battered colony ship that had carried their ancestors into the void 300 years ago. That ship still existed, preserved in a place of honor at the heart of the remnant fleet. Its hull was scarred and worn, its engines long dead, but it was the most sacred object in human culture, the symbol of their survival. "All ships report ready," her tactical officer said. "Awaiting your command." Chun nodded slowly. She was 140 years old, kept alive by technology that her ancestors could not have imagined. She had been born in the darkness between stars, had never seen Earth except in recordings, had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Now it had arrived, and she found herself thinking not of victory, but of what came after. "Open a channel to the Vethrani command," she said. Her communications officer hesitated. "Admiral, they have refused all previous attempts at communication. Try again." The channel opened, and Chun spoke to the enemy fleet. "People of Vethros, this is Admiral Chun of the human remnant. I am offering you one final chance to surrender. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your weapons will be destroyed. Your leaders will face trial for crimes against humanity. But your civilians will not be harmed. Your world will not be burned. Your species will survive." Silence. Then a Vethrani voice, cold and proud. "We do not accept mercy from animals. We will die before we bow to you." Chun closed her eyes for a moment. She had expected this answer. She had hoped for something different, but she had expected this. "Then you will die," she said softly, "and history will remember that you chose this end." She cut the channel and turned to her tactical officer. "Begin the attack." The sky split open. The remnant fleet did not simply advance. They appeared everywhere at once, emerging from tiers in space that defied physics. Ships materialized inside the Vethrani formation, behind their defensive lines, above and below, and all around them. The battle plan was not a plan at all. It was chaos, designed to overwhelm an enemy that relied on order and discipline. The Vethrani fought with everything they had. Their weapons blazed against the human fleet, scoring hits, destroying ships, filling space with fire and death. They were brave, Chun admitted to herself. Foolish and cruel, but brave. It made no difference. Human ships moved like thoughts, coordinating with a precision that seemed impossible. Their weapons struck with surgical accuracy, targeting engines and weapon systems, crippling rather than destroying when possible. They did not fight like conquerors. They fought like surgeons, cutting away the diseased parts while leaving the healthy tissue intact. The battle lasted 6 days. 6 days of fire and death and constant pressure. The Vethrani defense grid fell layer by layer, each one taking hours of fighting to breach. The fleet dwindled ship by ship, each captain fighting until their vessel was crippled and captured or destroyed. The soldiers on the orbital platforms held their positions until they were overwhelmed by human forces who appeared inside their walls like ghosts. On the 7th day, the last Vethrani warship surrendered. The defensive grid was silent. The fleet was gone. 200 years of military power, the force that had destroyed Earth and hunted humanity across the stars, had been reduced to wreckage and prisoners. The remnant fleet hung above Vethros like angels of judgment. Below them, 2 billion Vethrani waited in their bunkers, certain that death was coming. Admiral Chun transmitted one final message. The war is over. All Vethrani military personnel are now prisoners of the human remnant and will be treated according to galactic law. Civilian authorities may resume normal functions. No harm will come to non-military personnel. She paused. This is not the end of your species. This is the end of your crimes. Ambassador Kethral was part of the Concord delegation that traveled to Vethros 2 weeks later. He walked through streets filled with Vethrani, who watched him with confused eyes. They had expected death. They had received mercy. They did not know how to process this. He found Admiral Chun in the ruins of the Vethrani High Command, standing before a window that overlooked the capital city. She looked tired. Not just physically tired, but tired in her soul, as if the weight of 300 years had finally caught up with her. You did it, Kethral said. You won, yes. Her voice was flat. We won, and now? Chun turned to face him. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Do you know what I wanted to do, Ambassador? When we surrounded this world, when I had the power to burn it the way they burned Earth. Do you know what every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do? Kethral said nothing. I wanted to watch them die. Chun's voice cracked. I wanted to see their cities burn. I wanted to hear them scream the way my ancestors screamed when the Vethrani came for them. I wanted revenge so badly that I could taste it. She looked out the window at the city below, at the people going about their lives in the shadow of the human fleet. But that is not why we survived. That is not why my great-grandmother flew into the void with nothing but a damaged ship and a dream. That is not what humanity is supposed to be. She turned back to Kethral. We are supposed to be better. We are supposed to be the species that reaches for the stars, not the species that burns them. If we had destroyed Vethros, we would have become exactly what the Vethrani accused us of being. We would have proven them right. So you chose mercy. I chose to be human. Chun smiled sadly. The real question is whether the galaxy will let us. The answer came sooner than either of them expected. In the years that followed, the remnant did not try to conquer the galaxy. They did not demand tribute or submission. Instead, they shared. Their technology, developed during centuries of isolation, was offered freely to any species that wanted it. Their scientists worked alongside researchers from dozens of worlds. Their artists created works that were celebrated across the stars. And slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to change. The Concord reformed itself, with humanity taking a seat at the table as equals. The Vethrani, stripped of their military power, were forced to confront their history for the first time. Some of them embraced the change, working to build a new relationship with the species they had nearly destroyed. Others clung to their hatred, bitter and broken, unable to accept that they had been defeated by those they considered inferior.